The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Very, very big week. Bernie Sanders today will be officially releasing his Medicare for All bill. We've been covering this for a while. It started with Bernie Sanders saying he would propose a Medicare for All single-payer bill. We then learned that California Senator Kamala Harris would be co-sponsoring it. We then learned that Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren would be co-sponsoring this bill. And even in advance of the release of the bill today by Bernie Sanders, we've had a growing list of co-sponsors. In fact, we'll put the list up on the screen for our television audience. This is a list that I believe is accurate as of 2 minutes ago, although there's a number of senators, I'll tell you after, who have expressed support for the bill, but have not indicated they would formally co-sponsor. Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin, Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, Mazie Hirono, Ed Markey, the other Massachusetts senator, the other guy, as he's known, Jeff Merkley, Bernie Sanders, of course, Brian Schatz, I mentioned Elizabeth Warren, and Sheldon Whitehouse. Also Al Franken, Patrick Leahy, Jean Shaheen, and Martin Heinrich, again, have expressed support. Not clear if they will co-sponsor. So a few thoughts on this. If you look at that list of senators that are co-sponsoring, really only Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin is in what could even be remotely called a swing state from the people who are co-sponsoring. So yes, the criticism that this is a low-risk thing for these senators to do, Democrats in blue states, when there's no chance we're getting Medicare for all because Republicans control everything right now, it's sort of a political gimme, and that's fine. I don't disagree with that, but I still think that this is very, very important. And we will do a full analysis of the specifics of the bill, hopefully tomorrow. Hopefully tomorrow we will have everything. The way, generally speaking, that this is expected to work is that Americans under 18 would immediately obtain universal Medicare cards, and that Americans not currently eligible for Medicare would be phased into the program over a 4-year period. This is the way we sort of expected it to be, Pat. Although I still want to look at the details because there were rumors over the last couple of weeks that this would not be a true single-payer program, that it would be a Medicare expansion that would still contain multi-payer aspects to it. But once we see the bill, we'll know. That's the great thing. We can read the bill.
Yeah, and it's great to see that Bernie Sanders is having such an influence on the Democratic Party now. You know, it's a shame that he lost his presidential bid.
Sure.
But look at the long-lasting consequences of his run. Now, not only do you have support for Medicare for all,
yes,
you also have the Fight for 15. He has 31 co-sponsors in the Congress.
And officially became part... The Democrats officially say they are for $15 minimum wage, or are they still on 12?
I think that's part of the new platform now. It's moved on from 12. And then you also have free college being introduced in New York and all across the country.
And of course, the term free being used sort of loosely. We understand that nothing is truly free, right? We're
talking about tuition in public universities.
Yes, and paid for through taxation and other means. As far as the connection to employers for health care under Bernie's bill, employer-provided health care would be replaced. The employers would still pay a higher payroll tax or tax of some sort, but they would no longer be required to provide the insurance to the employees. You would still have private insurers, right? If people continue to prefer private insurance, or they want to have private insurance for elective treatments, if private insurance will cover those treatments, they will be free to do so. I do have a question about the strategic aspect of this. Republicans have been beaten down and up and all over the place on health care. Multiple failed attempts to repeal Obamacare and to replace it with terrible ideas. Is this proposal from Bernie simultaneously something that will not pass anytime soon, and something that gives Republicans an opportunity to say, hey, forget about the failure of the AHA. Look at crazy Bernie and his free stuff that he's offering, and sort of to shift the attention over to Bernie Sanders?
But as Medicare for All becomes more and more popular in the polls, though, I don't think that attack is going to hit very hard, don't you think?
I think it depends on the language that's used, that the language that Democrats use. Most Americans agree that government should provide a basic level of care for everyone. So the specifics of Medicare for All are not actually that controversial. Yes, taxes, you would be paying taxes, an employer would be paying taxes, the individual would probably also be paying more taxes, but compare it to Canada, right? Canada has such a system as what is being proposed here. The average American paid $11,365 in taxes last year. The average Canadian paid nearly $15,000 in taxes, right? About $3,300 more than the average American. But the average American paid twice as much for healthcare as the average Canadian. And that's what people often don't get. The long-term benefits will outweigh the individual short-term increase in taxation, and it will eventually save the average person money. That's the key.
It is the best plan on the table, and I think that's why Democrats have to push for it. Also because healthcare is going to be a central issue in the 2018 races and 2020.
Yep.
And you can't just run on this idea of protecting the Affordable Care Act, especially as premiums continue to rise, especially as providers continue to pull out. You have to have a solution, not just say, oh, we'll keep what we have in place because it's better than the Republican alternative.
And to be clear, the criticisms you're pointing to of the Affordable Care Act, they are not inherent to the Affordable Care Act.
That's
in
true,
other words,
yes.
The entire system is experiencing what you're describing. And of course, the Affordable Care Act is a program that provides health care to many millions of people who didn't have it, but it still is fundamentally working within the same paradigm.
And there's no telling how much higher those premiums would be if the Affordable Care Act wasn't put in place.
Right. Presumably, the within Affordable Care Act plans have seen smaller increases in pricing, although that is something that Republicans would take issue with. So now how about the senators that are co-sponsoring, right? Yeah, it's true. It's not risky for them. Like I said, everybody but Tammy Baldwin is in safe blue states. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. It'll never pass now. It's just an easy political gimme that doesn't really mean anything. I disagree that it means nothing. We've never had this level of public senatorial support, and maybe I'm naive, right? But I actually do believe that this matters. But I think ultimately it's going to be the public that, quote, gets this done if it ever will be done. It's great. Wow, I punched my mic because I'm just so excited.
Is that great?
It's great that we have 12 senators saying, hey, I am going to jump on board and co-sponsor this, and more senators who might co-sponsor or at least say they support the bill. It is Americans that need to put the pressure on constantly. Call, write, email, fax, telegram, smoke signals, whatever. It's a pain, but it's worth it. I'm reminded of just recently, Republican Senator John McCain killed the Affordable Care Act on the Senate floor. Well, the reality is it was all the people that showed up. They made their voices heard that they didn't want this, and McCain was reasonable enough to hear that. It's the people that need to activate here. I am convinced of that. And hey, pat on the back to every senator who's co-sponsoring, but it's the people that need to put the pressure on, and I hope that they will. Super interesting and kind of unexpected turn of events, which is rare in American Congress, but as is often the case, the headlines around this issue are very hyperbolic compared to the reality. Yesterday, members of the House of Representatives approved an amendment to what's called the Make America Secure and Prosperous Appropriations Act. Quite a mouthful of a name. And the amendment that was approved would undo the expansion of civil asset forfeiture that was executed by Trump's Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Now, you might be saying, David, what the hell are you talking about? Civil asset forfeiture? Asset forfeiture is the seizing of assets, including money, by the state. And this can be done for suspected terrorist activities, drug crimes. It can be done even for civil offenses. And it's controversial among both progressives and more libertarian-leaning Republicans and right-wingers because it involves the taking of assets from people who have not yet been convicted of crimes, sometimes not even been charged with a crime, merely for being suspected of a crime. And you might say, well, hold on a second, David, that sounds terrible. What argument could someone even make in support of that? There are a few. One popular one is that there are types of suspected crimes where it's really difficult to go after the suspected perpetrators, and that by seizing their assets on suspicion of a crime, it could be the only way that law enforcement might be able to interrupt, for example, smuggling operations that cross country lines or international drug cartels or whatever. as you probably imagine, it is hugely abused and opens up the door to significantly discriminatory and arbitrary application. So how did Jeff Sessions expand it? Well, what Sessions did was restart an element of this program, which allows state and local police to seize assets, give them to the federal government, and then in turn, the federal government gives some portion back to local police. And it sounds kind of weird, but it's a way that local law enforcement can sometimes get around state law, and which limits asset seizure, and then get some of those assets back for their self-enrichment and, of course, betterment of the providing of law enforcement services to the community, as they would say. So what actually happened here? An amendment was proposed, and it passed. And that amendment rolls back Jeff Sessions' restarting of this plan. But what the huge headlines are missing, which say, wow, this is absolutely tremendous, is that an amendment was passed, but it's an amendment to H.R. 3354. H.R. 3354 hasn't actually passed the House, right? So H.R. 3354 now contains this amendment, but none of it has actually passed.
Well, it's still a good sign, though. I mean, it looks like we're heading in a bipartisan direction, even though bipartisanship, for bipartisanship's sake, is not necessarily a good thing. But it depends on the issue, right? And I think it makes sense that Democrats and Republicans are coming together on this, because Democrats are all about criminal justice reform, about lowering the population in jails and prisons, and Republicans are all about due process as of late.
So what would have to happen for Amendment 126 to actually become the law? Well, first and foremost, the House has to pass H.R. 3354. They have to pass it containing the amendment. Then the Senate needs to pass it as written, not very likely, or more likely the Senate would pass their version. Then they would go into the conference committee. And in the conference between the House and Senate versions of the bill, they would have to agree to keep Amendment 126 or something containing very similar language in the bill. And then, even if it passes the conference committee, even if it passes the House and Senate, then the president needs to sign it into law, including the provision. That's a pretty uphill battle. What's the good news? The good news is if Trump tried to veto it, there's a good chance that the veto could be overridden by Congress. In the House, the amendment passed with a voice vote, meaning it was so obvious merely by voice that there was overwhelming support that they didn't even need to do a roll call vote. We don't know what would ultimately happen in the Senate. And by the way, here's the sort of big bummer with this entire thing. And I don't want to just pretend like this is not news. It's interesting. But even if all the stuff I just mentioned happens, all it would do is roll back the most recent expansion of civil asset forfeiture by Jeff Sessions. That's a tiny fraction of the broader civil asset forfeiture infrastructure that exists anyway. Sounds sort of deflating, right?
And I think just recently people got a real-world example of this, because there was that Hispanic hot dog vendor who was shut down by UC Berkeley police for not having a permit, and they took his money away from him. And that's a little bit different because that's asset seizure, because it's done by law enforcement, whereas forfeiture is by like a prosecutor ordered by a court.
Sure.
But I think just putting this in the public eye draws a lot of attention to it.
I agree.
I think it'll move us forward in the right direction.
I agree. And even though when you look at the details, it is pretty deflating. If initially you think, we're really sticking it to them, we're sticking it to Jeff Sessions, but are we really? I guess we'll see. Still, this is an issue that a lot of people don't know anything about, and any opportunity to put it out there, I think, is good. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter @DPacman. The show is on Twitter @DavidPacman Show. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Benjamin Merrill. Benjamin, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can, of course, sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. I won't say anything else because I do want to talk about big things, important things going on with the show, and it sort of does relate to membership. So let me just go into that now, get it out of the way, then we'll move on to Hatriot Mail and having a grand old time here at David Pakman Show Studios. So let's just catch you up on what's going on. I've not been talking about this a lot, but I do need to talk to you today really about the plan that we have, and I hope you'll be a part of, to keep the David Pakman Show afloat amidst a total and utter implosion. So to give you the background, it's been a really difficult 5+ months for the David Pakman Show. Adpocalypse, YouTube Adpocalypse started on March 31st of 2017. And on that day, effectively overnight, we lost 99% of our YouTube revenue. Now, you might listen to the podcast, you might watch on TV or radio, and you might say, I don't care about YouTube. YouTube doesn't make a difference. And that's fine. But what you should know is that YouTube as a revenue generating source was a big part of what we were doing. Nearly half of our revenue used to come from YouTube, and it subsidized all other aspects of the show. The total implosion that took place was sort of precipitated by some controversial articles written by the Wall Street Journal and others, which alleged that YouTube's ad filtering system couldn't prevent ads from big companies like Coca-Cola and others from being placed in front of racist and hateful videos. Now, many of you who watch on YouTube know this wasn't actually a problem. In fact, if anything, the system was too strict rather than too relaxed. If we even talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, those videos would not make money on YouTube. So really, this was a solution to a problem that didn't exist. This problem sort of ebbed and flowed. In April and May, it looked like maybe revenue was starting to come back. But ultimately, revenue from YouTube is down about 85 to 88%, okay? We have our revenue chart to put up on the screen, and we started the year very strong. Point 2 is YouTube Adpocalypse. 3 is when it looked like things were improving. And 4 is ultimately where we are now. And I keep waiting around for things to improve, and so I can say, hey, you know what? Everything's fine financially. We don't have to worry about it. It's just not going to happen. And in fact, if you now Google on Google News, YouTube demonetization, you will find endless hours of reading about this issue, and the revenue's not coming back. And there's been some horrible public incidents that are only making this worse. Recently, one of the major YouTubers who goes by the name PewDiePie said the N-word in one of his videos. Again, terrible publicity for the ad-safe nature of YouTube videos, even though, of course, it has nothing to do with anything that we're doing on the David Pakman Show. We are FCC safe because we are on broadcast radio and television. This is terrible publicity. And we are now effectively writing off YouTube revenue as a source of revenue for the show. We just can't count on it providing operating funds for the show. We've had the benefit of a couple major advertisers getting in touch with the program, offering a lot of money. But the truth is they're not ideologically aligned with us. They're not oil companies, but they're not great fits either. And so that really is, you know, the companies that have a lot of money to pour in, typically they don't want to deal with shows as small as ours. We're not big enough for big advertisers to work with us directly. And the couple that have approached us so far are just not good fits, and I wouldn't feel good about having those advertisers on the show. So there's a couple of ways the show could go. One is we basically say, listen, this is it. This is the show. We have to scale back. We can replace lost revenue with ads if there's a fit that is okay. And we sort of have to postpone the ideas for future growth of the show. The other possibility, which is what I want to do, and I hope it's what you want to do if you value the program, is we say, hey, we're going to replace the lost revenue. We're going to replace the lost revenue in a few different ways, and we're going to get beyond the lost revenue. And then we're actually going to start doing not only the new stuff we've had planned for you for the last year or so, but all sorts of other new content. And we will have actually, if we're able to do that, total independence. I don't want to be doing these segments and pledges and fundraising and membership drives any more than you probably want me to, but I have to do it. I have to do it so that we can keep doing 5 shows a week. And again, when you look at the revenue curve that I put up on the screen for you, the proof is in the pudding. So what am I asking for? I'm really not asking for much. Remember when we were on vacation for a couple of weeks, our summer vacation, and there was no new content? A lot of people wrote in saying, hey, you know, I signed up for membership during your vacation because now I know what you mean by if all of a sudden the David Pakman Show was gone. I had a 60 or 75, 80-minute hole in my day that I was used to spending with you, hearing about the news, and it was all of a sudden empty. And a lot of people realized, hey, a couple bucks a month is very fair for the programming that you provide. And that's all we're talking about, right? We really only need a few bucks a month from 3% of our audience, okay? These are some surprising numbers to a lot of people in our audience. We estimate that around 1% of our audience contributes financially to the program, okay? And that's great. The show should be free. But If you can afford just a few dollars, that's how we're funded. And if we could go from 1% of our audience funding us to 3% of our audience funding us, even at $1 or $2 a day, we can forget about the fundraising and the pledge drives, and we can just move on to talking about and planning for and producing all the great content that I want to produce. Now, if you want to read more about how this has affected us, there's a couple of really good articles that have been written. One is in the New York Times. The New York Times and Amanda Hess wrote an article about how the David Pakman Show is getting crushed on YouTube. Wired Magazine and Davey Alba wrote a great article about how the David Pakman Show is getting crushed. Those articles are available on the press page at davidpakman.com. We are starting new initiatives for our subscribers. We are restarting supporter-only live streams where everybody gets to hang out, invite only, ask questions. If you sign up for membership or Patreon, you will get invited to those supporter-only live streams. 2 ways to support us, and really, please consider whether you think this is worth a couple of bucks a month. I believe that it is. Number 1 is membership, okay? You go to davidpakman.com/membership, you pick your membership, and you click on the red sign up button. And on the second page of the sign up process, if you want a 40% off coupon code, you can use coupon code IVoted17. If you're not yet ready to commit to membership, go to davidpakman.com/dollar. You can get a $1 trial membership for a week. If you like it, stick with it. Almost everybody who has done the trial membership continues to be a member because they realize this is really, really great stuff, okay? Membership, it's huge. Supporter live streams, the entire thing is happening. Patreon, okay? Previously, when you went to patreon.com/David Pakman Show and donated $1 or $2 or $5 or whatever, you received no benefits. We have changed that. You can now get the behind-the-scenes videos and members-only updates at the $2 level on Patreon. We can keep Patreon up. At the $5 level, you can get access to the bonus show, previously only available to members. At the $10 level on Patreon, you can get access to the full show and bonus shows, previously only accessible to members. And as you'll see on the left side, if you're watching with us here, we are at 1,902 patrons, which is just short of our goal of 2,000. We are 98 new patrons away from 2,000. What happens at 2,000? I do an entire show from the broadcast studio with my hair untamed, which a lot of people have been asking for a while. What is David's hair like when there's no product in his hair? You will find out for an entire live show when we get to 2,000 patrons. When we get to 3,000 patrons, we are going to be creating exclusive Patreon-only content, including regular patron thank you videos, as well as additional news and politics stories just for our patrons. That's patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Donate $1, donate $2, donate $5 or $10, okay? This really is going to make or break the show. It's over with YouTube. I wish it were different. I wish we hadn't lost 85 to 88% of what made up half of our total revenue. It's the reality. I can't change it, but what I can do is be upfront with you about what's going on and explain to you that this revenue has to be replaced, and I'm asking for your help to do it. Okay, let's go from something serious to something not so serious. I do want to get to Hatriot Mail. Quick reminder about what Hatriot Mail is.
It's like taking an apple pie, filling it with pages from the Old Testament, topping it with hollow points, and serving it with a side of homophobia. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman.
Right.
Because America. And because freedom.
All right, no introduction necessary for this week's Hatriot Mail. Let's take a listen to it together.
Comment great shh. Your views are warped, and you are a sellout and leftist scum. Your liberal squood viewpoints suck, and I hope that the world's morals remain intact before your sickening democratic ways being implemented on us tries to get it to be normalized and accepted.
I never get the sellout thing. Like, who have we sold out to, and what are the big benefits we've received from selling out? Don't you think if we had sold out, I wouldn't be talking about people donating $1 on Patreon every other day?
And who would we even be selling out to? I mean, there's just so many conflicting groups.
I think it's code for either the Democratic Party or Jews of some kind, like George
Right.
Soros or Israel or something like that. They're not saying that, but usually those are the key players in that one.
Well, I like skewed spelled with a Q.
Skewed.
Oftentimes you don't even see the letter Q, and whenever you can put it in there, I think you should.
Extraneous use of Qs, I'm absolutely in favor of, and it seems Hatriots are as well. Coupon code Hatriot40. Use the coupon code Hatriot40 to turn Hatriot Mail into something that benefits the show. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined on the program today by Steve Lehto, who's an attorney in Michigan who has specialized in automobile warranty law for more than 25 years. He's written several books on cars, history, and the law, including the Lemon Law Bible. And he has a podcast called Lehto's Law and is a weekly contributor to roadandtrack.com. Steve, so great to talk to you. You know, a number of people in our audience listen to you. And they said, David, you talk about a lot of the topics that Steve Lehto talks about. You should really get him on. So that's what we're doing, I guess. That's the explanation to the audience.
Perfectly good excuse for me.
So let's start with just some simple questions people often have. Lemon law, right? People have a very, very general understanding. If I get a car and it was sort of hidden from me that it's really a car that has problems, I can give the car back. The law protects me. But the truth is the law is much narrower than that. So can you talk a little bit about what the lemon law really says?
Yeah, all 50 states, each one has its own lemon law, but the lemon laws are very restrictive, and they almost always specifically refer only to brand new cars. So if you're buying a brand new car, the lemon law will protect you if it turns out to be defective. But if you're buying a used car, all bets are off.
And is that regardless of whether it's from a dealership or private party sale?
Well, this is where it gets trickier, and this varies from state to state, but generally speaking, when you buy a car from an individual used, you have almost no protections, meaning it's presumed that you're buying the vehicle as is, which means you're buying it with all faults. So if you're walking down the street and you see a guy with a for sale sign in his car window and you negotiate with him and you buy that car could blow up on your drive home and there's not much you can do about it.
So if you're buying a used car, and let's use the private party example, what is the sort of logical due diligence someone should do? Is it, I'd like to take the car to my mechanic and have them look it over?
Yes, but nobody ever does. The number one piece of advice I have for all used car buyers, whether you're buying from a dealership or an individual, is to take the vehicle to a mechanic and have it inspected, because a mechanic can find things that you and I probably can't, even though I'm pretty car savvy. And I'm not making this up, in 26 years of practicing law, I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands of people who said, I bought a used car, I was driving it around, I noticed it was acting funny, so then I took it to my mechanic. And I said, well, why'd you wait? Why didn't you take it before you bought it? And they said, well, I don't know. The guy said it was a good car. Well, they can say it's a good car. There's nothing wrong with it. It's called sales puffery. But you can't believe what the salesman tells you or the seller tells you, because it's in their best interest to claim there's nothing wrong with the car.
And what should you expect to pay a mechanic just for looking over a car before you buy it?
It depends on the mechanic, but if you know somebody really well, I know people who do this stuff for free, but $50 or $100, and people go, wait, $100 for an inspection? Well, first of all, a mechanic is trained, you're paying for his expertise, but if you spend $100 and the mechanic comes back to say, don't buy this car, it's got a broken frame, or the transmission is slipping and it's going to be catastrophic, he or she can save you thousands of dollars. The $100 is nothing. And trust me, when you've called my office and I've broken the news to you that you can't do anything about that piece of junk you just bought, you're going to wish you paid $100 for an inspection.
Okay, so that's a private party. Now let's talk a little bit about going to a car dealership, an experience that for a lot of people is not a particularly pleasant one. There's nothing certainly legally problematic about what we might consider high pressure sales techniques at car dealerships, but what should one be sort of aware of or watching for when it comes to sales techniques at dealerships that should, if not raise legal problems, raise at least some red flags for the buyer?
In most states, car dealerships are allowed to sell cars as is, which means that the minute you sign the document making the car yours, anything can go wrong with it, and there's nothing you can do about it legally against the seller. So that means you need to be very, very careful and very, very sure that you want to buy that car. And I've had people, I get a phone call every day. People call my office, they say, Steve, I just bought a used car. Dealership claimed it was great, claimed they inspected it. I get in the car, I'm driving home, the engine explodes. And now they won't give me my money back. And I said, they don't have to. And they're like, what? And I'm like, you bought the car as is with all faults. That fault may have been the fact the engine was about to explode. And they might not have even known it. And that's why you got to get it inspected first, but understand the rights that you have and the rights that you don't have. And I feel like I'm an emergency surgeon running around in a battlefield trying to tell people don't get shot, because once you get shot, there's not much I can do for you. And that's what many used car buyers have happened to them. Something bad happens to them, they call an attorney. And it's like, no, the law doesn't protect you. When you buy a used car from a car dealership and you read the purchase agreement, it almost always says right on it, nothing said to you by the seller matters, and you're buying the vehicle as is. And people just sign documents without reading them. And those documents have very, very dire consequences later. In fact, many of these cases, if you were to file them, would get thrown out because of the document you signed when you bought that car.
One of the sort of decisions that people often make when buying a car, typically from a dealership, although you can get financing for a car even for a private party sale, is first of all, do I buy or lease if it's a new car? But also, what term do I want for this auto loan? And we recently reported that the average auto loan term is longer than ever in the United States. This is problematic to me in particular because with cars, you're talking about assets of depreciating value. In other words, the longer you own it, all else being equal, the less that that asset is worth. And to me, adding interest payments to the end of these car loans by extending them at the point at which the vehicle is worth less than ever before is pretty concerning to me. What are your thoughts on what's going on with auto loans right now? Do you believe there's a sort of auto loan bubble, as some say?
Well, yes, and there's two things going on here. One of which is the length of the loans have been growing over the years. I remember when a new car loan is 3 years, maybe 4 years. Now they're like 7 or 8 years,
Sure.
and it's like buying a house. Who's gonna finance a car over 8 years? But people do that because they want to buy more cars than they can actually afford. And that's what I like about the Truth in Lending Act documents. When you look at a loan document and it has this, row of boxes across the top of the contract. And the far right-hand corner, it says, here's what this loan will have cost you if you make all payments on time. And it's usually some crushing amount. And if you really want to buy an $80,000 or $90,000 car over 8 years, knock yourself out. But understand, like you pointed out, it's a depreciating asset. So the value of the car is dropping as you pour more and more money into the car, including all those interest payments. And so that is a very serious problem that I've been watching over the years, and it's just getting worse as time goes by.
And is there some point at which this could sort of implode like the mortgage crisis of years ago? I mean, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. The longer you have an auto loan for, the more likely it is that at some point during that loan, you decide, I want to trade this car in. You end up, of course, being upside down on the loan and end up rolling payments from the prior car into the new car loan. And this can sort of escalate exponentially, really, in a sense. Is there some possibility of an implosion that will have some major impact on the auto industry?
Yeah, there is, but I don't know if it's going to come from these or if it's going to come from the subprime lenders, because subprime lenders out there will right now lend you money to buy a car. If you've got a credit score that's 2 figures, like you've got zero credit, you've got, you're the worst credit risk on earth. There are dealerships out there that will finance you, and they'll often say, we'll provide financing for you. And they'll take some piece of junk car worth $1,000, sell it to you for $5,000 at 29% interest rate or whatever the interest rate is they can do in their state. And you wind up with these outrageous payments on a piece of junk car. And the collateral is not worth what that loan looks like on paper. But, it's one of these things where a lot of those people get stuck in this cycle where they can't get out from underneath that car, but they need a car to get to work. Then they lose their job. Then they lose their car. And I've seen some statistics on how large that pool of money is. It's being lent to the bottom tier of the borrowers out there. So I think that if there's going to be a collapse in the automobile loan market, I don't think it's going to come from the top with the people who are, buying a BMW over 8 years. It's going to be the number of people buying these overpriced pieces of junk at 29% interest rate that they can't afford.
How about autonomous cars? We've talked about the sort of ethical and moral concerns with autonomous cars and accidents. If it's not the driver who made the decision for the vehicle, is it the programmer of the car that is responsible, or how are these sort of issues going to be handled morally? What about legally? Have you thought about the legal issues that could come up with autonomous vehicles?
As an attorney, I think that many attorneys look at the field of autonomous cars and goes, oh, goody, we can't wait for them to get here. Because, if I run my car into your car, you sue me, and that's, pretty straightforward. But if my autonomous car with me in it runs into your autonomous car with you in it, and we're both injured, okay, I'm suing you, I'm suing the manufacturer of my car, you're suing the manufacturer of your car, you're suing me. It just adds another layer of complexity to the litigation. So I'm really thinking that there's going to be a big learning curve, if you want to call it that, where a lot of this stuff gets sorted out in the courts. And keep in mind that we might have different laws in each of the 50 states. Each of the 50 states might allow autonomous cars, but who gets sued and for what might change from state to state. So heaven forbid that your autonomous car and you go on vacation in Florida and someplace in Kentucky run into somebody from Missouri in their autonomous car. And next thing you know, the case caption looks like the roadmap of New Jersey because everyone's suing everybody.
Well, it seems like it's a situation ripe for what we saw with, actually, there was an interesting ruling in New York State related to child porn. I don't know if you heard about this one, where someone was found not guilty of possessing or obtaining child porn because they merely viewed images in their browser but didn't actually right-click the images and save them to their hard drive in a deliberate way, which of course is a problem with how the laws were written. That's since been amended. Do you predict some similar issues in terms of autonomous vehicles and what the laws are now?
Well, I think what's going to have to happen, and there actually are some professors, law professors, working on various things like this, but they need to have a uniform set of laws that are going to cover all 50 states. And there's a certain precedent for that kind of uniformity. There's a thing called the Uniform Commercial Code, for instance, that 49 of the 50 states have adopted, and parts of it have been adopted by Louisiana, that simply discuss the sale of goods, so that you don't have to figure out what the law is in each state before you sell your products there. So I suspect that someone's going to come up with a uniform system of laws as to how this stuff needs to be handled. It's just a question of whether they can get all 50 states to adopt it and whether it works or not. But, if it's big enough business and there's a lot of enough money behind it, maybe they can work the problems out and really make these cars safe. But as you and I both know, when someone dies, no one says, well, gee, they died, but, at least the car was safe. People immediately knee-jerk response go, oh, it must not have been safe because someone died. Therefore, I want to start suing people.
Check out Steve Lehto's podcast, Lehto's Law. You can also check out his various books, including the Lemon Law Bible. Steve, so great to talk to you. I appreciate you taking time to come on today.
Anytime.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
NBC News correspondent Katy Tur wrote a book called Unbelievable, My Front Row Seat to the Craziest Campaign in American History, of course, about her coverage of Donald Trump's candidacy last year. And Donald Trump, according to the book, last year, during the campaign, gave Katy Tur an unwelcome kiss on the cheek during the campaign. Tur said Trump kissed her before an appearance on MSNBC's Morning Joe. She said, quote, "Before I know what's happening, his hands are on my shoulders and his lips are on my cheek. My eyes widen, my body freezes, my heart stops." I'm getting the chills just from reading this. It's making me have to clear my throat. Trump was apparently regularly sort of around Katy Tur privately, even though he was targeting her publicly during the campaign. He would refer to her as Little Katy, not exactly a sign of respect from a candidate to a member of the media. He called her a third-rate reporter during a rally. And Katy Tur says that after that incident, the Secret Service actually walked her to her car because they feared for her safety when Trump identified her at a rally as a third-rate reporter. Of course, after news of Katy Tur's assertion in her book leaked, Donald Trump took to Twitter. We don't know for sure that this tweet refers to what Katy Tur wrote in the book, but it appears to. He wrote, "Fascinating to watch people writing books and major articles about me, and yet they know nothing about me and have zero access." A few thoughts here, okay? Number one, if you look on the, in the catacombs and bowels of the internet, this is fake. Katy Tur is a liar. She's making it up. Really? If this is all Donald Trump did, given Trump's history, I would say Katy Tur is lucky that all he did was give her an unwanted kiss on the cheek. This is exactly what Trump says he does, right? On the Access Hollywood tapes, Trump says he just kisses women when he wants, that they let him because of who he is, and if you got to grab him by the you-know-what, he will. Secondly, how shocking is it that unwanted advances or touching or whatever from the President of the United States barely even register because of the broader context of what's going on? In a normal world, you'd think that such an allegation would be a huge, huge deal. But yeah, there were some stories about this, but it's not even making a big splash because, number one, it's just another woman on the list of close to 24 at this point that have made similar assertions. And in addition to that, there's so many other scandals going on in perpetuity.
You know, in other countries, it's not unusual for two people to meet and they exchange kisses on the cheek. I mean, we see that around the world.
Argentina?
In Argentina. But, you know, it's just not typically a custom here.
No.
And if it is done, it's not done in any sort of sexual or romantic way.
Yeah.
With Donald Trump, I mean, we can't give him that benefit of the doubt because his words contradict that.
Yeah. And the other aspect of this for people saying it's just fake is what accusations have been made about Donald Trump that have been proven false. I mean, in all of this, it's like, Trump's lying about his charitable donations. Turns out to be true. More and more of the Russian dossier, initially unproven, turns out to be true. There's just no trend of all of these incorrect allegations being made about Donald Trump. And lastly, I do think Trump is sort of off sexually, but I think a lot of this stuff is even the language of grab him by the pussy. It's more about dominance than it is about sex, right? It's more about Trump being in control. And we get insight into that from something Katy Tur said. Katy Tur said when Trump kissed her, the first thing she thought of was, I hope the cameras didn't see it because my bosses will not take me seriously. She's probably right that if her bosses knew Trump kissed her, it wouldn't be good for her career-wise. It would raise questions about her journalistic ethics or appearance or whatever, even though it would be effectively punishing her for having been the recipient of unwanted advances from Trump. She's right about that, and I think that goes to show that there's a dominance aspect to this that seems to be what is motivating Trump in some way.
And it's like Trump knows that the kiss is unwanted, too, which is an extra layer there because it is about dominance. I mean, in that Access Hollywood tape, he said that he doesn't even wait, implying that he doesn't even wait for consent. And I think that was the most damning part of that.
No doubt about it. And listen, Trump is a vile guy, right? Like a genuinely repulsive person. I was thinking of the entire who would you rather have a beer with thing. Remember that? Would you rather have a beer with Bush or Obama? Would you rather have a beer with Obama or Romney? Actually, well, Romney's a Mormon. He supposedly doesn't drink, so that's not a good example. Trump actually supposedly doesn't drink either, but the idea of it, right? Can anyone really imagine just hanging out with Trump? And I'm reminded of the video of Trump with the French president where they're sitting there watching a live marching band and the band breaks into a Daft Punk cover in marching band style. And Trump just looks miserable, like he doesn't get it. Emmanuel Macron is laughing. He gets it. Even if you don't recognize the song, you get, oh, this is interesting. This is cool. Trump just doesn't get it. Like it seems miserable to be around him. And Melania certainly seems miserable to be around him. This is just not a person I have any interest in being around. And that's why I totally get, the victims of Hurricane Harvey saying, yeah, we're not interested in meeting with Donald Trump. Just, yeah, we're good. It's not necessary. The parents of Heather Heyer, who was run over in that horrible Charlottesville incident, saying, yeah, we have no interest in meeting with Donald Trump. I get it. I don't want to be around the guy either.
You don't know what he's going to say, too. If he just says, well, it's one and the same with the neo-Nazis as the Antifa groups.
Could make it worse, yeah. Heather Heyer, she was a great person, just like the great people on the other side as well. Just absolutely horrible. This is a wacky story from last week that I missed, and I want to mention it to you. There is something called SFTS, okay? It's a condition that is short for severe fever with Thrombocytopenia Syndrome, okay, which is transmitted by ixodid or ixodid, not exotic, but ixodid or ixodid, I believe it's pronounced, ticks. And there's been an effort by the government of Miyazaki in Japan to warn people about this, how it's transmitted, how to prevent it. And they had a press conference recently that was meant to warn people about the diseases that are transmitted by ticks. They decided to bring in a live tick to the conference. And the tick was placed on a white piece of paper together with another tick that had died after sucking blood, all of a sudden, the live tick is no longer on that piece of paper. Total chaos breaks out in the room. Everyone from journalists to employees looking under pieces of paper and under the desks for this live tick that has escaped didn't find it. And the local government released 2 types of insecticide across the entire press room. Could no one have predicted that this might happen? I mean, why not put it in a little glass tube with a stopper? And I get that ticks move slowly. They're not exactly the cheetahs of the insect world or whatever. But why not just put it in a test tube or something like that?
It's a very funny story. It reminds me of that South Park episode where the teacher is showing everyone a case of marijuana.
Oh, yeah.
As if so they know, what to look for, what to smell for, I guess. And one of the students just takes it, and that just ensues chaos. I mean, it's like the same thing in this.
Could we say that if you were to be bit by a tick, that's the room you would want to be in with all of the tick experts or something? I don't know. I had a tick actually attach itself to me a few years ago. I went hiking, and it was really hot out in Western Massachusetts. So I know when you go hiking, you're supposed to wear long sleeves and long pants, but I didn't because it was really, really hot. At some point, a tick attached itself to me. I didn't notice it until I was home and showering, and I thought I had a little piece of fuzz on my hip, like right on my pelvis, and I just grabbed it and tried to pull it off. And of course, my skin stretched with it because the tick was completely attached. And I looked up what to do. You put some alcohol on it, and then with tweezers, you grab the head. I was able to pull it off, and it released. I didn't know how many hours it had been on me. It was a long weekend. Called the doctor, explained what happened. They say, well, listen, really, you usually need at least 24 hours, if not longer, to transmit Lyme disease, even if the tick was a carrier. You only went hiking a few hours ago. You're probably fine, but we should probably give you 2 days of this antibiotic just preventatively. And I said, oh, you know what? I'm pretty sure that antibiotic is on my list of antibiotics that I actually am allergic to. And because it was a long weekend, this was before it was as easy to look at my medical record, I guess. The doctor said, I don't have any way of seeing whether this antibiotic is on your list of medicine allergies. And by the time I can get in and look on Tuesday, it will have been more than the 48-hour period during which you would take antibiotics prophylactically. So I ended up not taking the antibiotics. This was 5 years ago or so. And by all indications, I did not contract Lyme disease. So that's my tick story.
Well, at least they were smart enough to not pick a tick that was carrying this disease, right? I mean,
the tick in the room.
Just one that would normally carry that disease, but not exactly
you
that
would
specific
assume
one.
that the live tick they bring into the room is one that they know is not carrying this disease, SFTS.
You would hope so.
Who really knows? But totally chaotic scene. Very, very weird. Okay, the Louisiana troll has come out of hiding, out of the woodwork. I don't know what you want to call it. But the Louisiana troll called in and apparently missed my story about Hillary Clinton's new book and is, I guess, expecting me to recommend Hillary's book because, as far as he knows, I think everything Hillary does is great, which is weird because I have been slammed the last week because I've been criticizing Hillary. Take a listen to this.
What up, David Shilly Willy Pac-Man? I was just wondering when you're going to recommend the book, What Happened to Your Audience.
Oh.
I know you like recommending books, and I know you really like Hillary Clinton, so
wow.
When are you going to do it? Like the big, guys, read this book. This was great. And are you voting for her again in 2020? That's all.
Very good question. Thank you. Who could watch the show and think that I just am this big fan of Hillary Clinton? I don't get how somebody could watch the show and come away with that. It's really, really weird. And by the way, is that my voice when I recommend books? Hey, guys, I want to recommend this book to you. I go, how is that even my voice? It's weird.
No.
I don't buy it. I don't get it. We've got a tremendous bonus show for you today. I mean, truly, folks, truly, I am hearing that this is the best bonus show that we've done. If you are a coffee lover, you don't have to worry about Pat forcing a Keurig on you. You do have to worry about climate change impacting coffee production. We will talk about the funny little incident involving ESPN sideline reporter Sergio Dip. And we will also talk about middle-class incomes and 2016. 2 ways to get access to the bonus show. There used to be just one way. For years, there was one way to access the bonus show, which was membership. There are now 2 ways, membership and Patreon. Very, very exciting, folks, I'll tell you. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show, davidpakman.com/membership. We'll speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.